Up, everybody? It's your boy Drew with High Fight IQ, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boys Todd Adkins and Miguel Iterate. Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 shows worldwide and has worked with Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, Bodog, and ADCC. Make sure you subscribe to the Todd Atkins Show on YouTube. You can also find Miguel on his YouTube channel at MMA Collector 74. Don't forget to subscribe to High Fight IQ on all social media platforms, the House Call Sports on YouTube, the Fight Pit on YouTube. Now let's talk some fights, baby. Let's go.
All right, this is Todd Atkins. I'm back with Miguel Iterate. The show everyone likes, MMA Conspiracy Hour. We don't get to do it as much, but when we do, it's always great. And subscribe to the channel, like the videos. You know, we want to get more subscribers and get more people pay attention to this channel. So
or just send cash.
No, yeah, that's all right. But anyway, oh yeah, and we do have memberships, but they're just 99 cents if you want to get a membership. 99 cents is nothing. You can do that. Now, we're going to talk about BJ Penn. You know, I lived on Oahu for 14 years. So this is, when you have Hawaii-based stories, I have a lot of people I can go to. So I think I'll be able to shed some information on things that other people couldn't. And before we start, I'm just going to let Miguel, I always let Miguel kind of open up and talk about BJ Penn and this situation a little bit.
Well, first of all, it really is another MMA tragedy here in the making. You know, one of the guys that many people consider an all-time great, definitely had in the early part of his career put together a resume that, you know, two division world champion, some of the wins and things. Definitely he was in the elite. You know, I remember the first time I heard his name was from Frank Shamrock. And Frank was talking about how amazing he is. And, you know, for people who don't know the era, and don't know Frank, you know, Frank didn't sing many people's praises this way, you know, but Frank was unbelievably impressed with this guy from the very beginning. Um, you know, talk to other people from that era, Bob Cook, Javier Mendez, guys that had access to BJ when he came to the California area for the first time and was training there and left Hawaii. That's where the Prodigy nickname comes from, you know, um, where he was going to be, he was kind of destined to be a top guy from the very beginning. In a way, that may have hurt him a little bit right at the very beginning because back then a lot of the sport was paying your dues, and he probably entered his debut was in the UFC, which at the time was unheard of in MMA. And he probably, I know that his first opponent was lists me as his official manager for that fight. So I provided the UFC BJ's opponent for his first fight is a All-American wrestler who was 5-0 at the time named Joey Gilbert out of Michigan.
Yeah, great fight.
And I know Gilbert, you know, hard-nosed, tough guy. You want Gilbert next to you in a, you know, in a ditch in World War I or II. You know what I mean? This is a real hard-nosed guy, but BJ may, you know, beat him in the first round. BJ was all that. But Joey made, you know, 2-2 for that fight, 2000 and 2000. And I believe BJ probably made about 10-10. So right from the very beginning, he was actually, you know, not that 10-10 is anything to write home about, but there was always the rumors and so I've done some looking into this for the last couple of days. BJ has some family money, you know, so 10-10 wasn't of great shakes, but it was kind of a signal that he was going to have be treated as an elite guy and a guy that was kind of got special treatment. And I think when you send that signal from the very beginning, that's some of what you see now, in that there's nobody who can control him. There's nobody who tells him, hey, calm down, listen to me. That he focuses and listens on. He only listens to himself. I think that pattern was established early on in his career, and now as other, you know, debilitating problems have come up, that's only gotten worse because he really thinks he's right about some of these things. You can tell, as crazy as some of what the things he's saying and putting videos out on really insane things. Um, he really believes them. You can tell he at least believes, and I don't think too many other people do. I've seen some of the other podcasts out there, pseudo MMA people at this point. Some people, actually defending him or considering that he might be okay, or that, not that he might be okay, but there might be people wronging him. And I really don't think that's the case. I think you've got a guy that, for lack of a better example, and people may not like that I say this, but I would consider that I think I'm right in this case, is if you're a physical talent of that nature, of the level this guy was, that does not equate to mental power. So he may be privileged, not very smart, was always taken care of by his family, which seems to be the case. And now that there is no one there taking care of him, he thinks he can take care of himself, has nobody that he listens to. And in a certain, when you're an athlete and when you're in the attention, the spotlight, and you've got a routine of training camps and things like that, it's a little easier to stay in control. Once that fabric of what keeps you in line starts to fall apart, and my understanding is that his brother, that took care of him his whole career, his brother moved to Florida, so he's not with him anymore. So, and I don't know how long ago JD went to Florida, but um, he no longer has anybody that he listens to, and has nobody really with his best interests in mind anymore. And
Well,
he's
I mean,
40.
he lives with his mom. Let's talk about this first because I want to kind of get to this. His
Good.
mom, funded all of his training, all of it. His mom is who he lives with in their mansion. And I mean, I can see why a mother would do it. She was BJ's biggest fan when he was fighting. I met her before. She would always wear the BJ Penn shirts all the time. And you could tell she was proud of him, but she was also proud to be his mom, the way she carried herself. And
Do you know what the family money is from? Because BJ, as far as I can trace it, BJ probably made between $2 and $5 million over the course of his MMA career, which is good money, but it's not money that in nowadays is going to last him for the rest of his life, kind of thing, especially with his lifestyle. Um, but the rumor is that his family's worth, probably 10 times that amount. Do you know what that money's from?
oh, she had all kinds of different, real estate and stuff. Uh,
Okay.
properties that she, some of them renting out, some of them, whatever the case may be, like tons of it in Gila. She's like a staple of that community, so to speak.
Okay.
And I can see why it'd be difficult for her to just put him out because she knows what would probably happen if she did. He's probably going to hurt someone, get hurt, or get put in prison. I mean, that's what bottom line. So I could see why she would try, just kind of ignore his behavior, try to live with him, for as long as she could. And seemed to spill over. And before I get back to originally when BJ started training, it was kind of because he was a problem person. He was causing problems and he was always getting into a lot of fights. He wasn't doing anything. He's never had a job ever besides fighting. And so his dad, who was into judo, sent him out. Well, he had been trained with some taekwondo teacher in some jujitsu, the guy had picked up some jiu-jitsu, and he knew Ralph Gracie. This taekwondo coach had learned from Ralph Gracie, and the taekwondo coach was living in Hilo. And so that's how he got the introduction to Ralph Gracie. And his dad got him a studio out there by his gym, and the rest is history as far as down the road. But it all stemmed from kind of him being a problem person to begin with. His whole career started from that. We got to do something with him. If we don't, there's going to be a problem.
And Ralph, as talented as Ralph is, Ralph or whatever you want to call him, um, he's not exactly the most stable role model kind of
Yeah,
teacher for a guy who's a loose cannon either.
right. For sure. Yeah. But yeah, go ahead, continue. I mean, I was just kind of added some context there.
Yeah, no, so now all of a sudden you start to fall, you start to look at a pattern. I remember the first MMA show in New Jersey, the UFC show in New Jersey, that BJ, and I've never talked to BJ. Like I provided his first opponent. He may know my name from the Abu Dhabis when I was involved with them. He never participated in the Abu Dhabi, so that would have been my opportunity to meet him, and talk to him. Um, but I remember when we were in that Jersey event and for the UFC that we were in the hallway walking, and there was a lot of baggage around that first Jersey show. I remember Jeff Munson, who's been forthcoming in the, another, loose cannon in the MMA world, right? But Jeff has been forthcoming about his steroid use. And I remember him coming to me because we had a good relationship. He fought for me many times, and he was an Abu Dhabi guy too. So my roots with Jeff Munson and I could talk. He came to me and was like, "Are these guys really drug testing?" Because it was a big surprise, and this was a wave of um. It went through the fighters in that hotel room that week of the show where that realization hit them, like, "Oh my God, we've never really had to worry about drug tests in the past. Now we have to worry about drug tests. The Jersey Commission is going to be their drug testing." And I remember walking by BJ, and BJ was with his group and entourage, and BJ was worried about testing positive for pot. Now, pot is not, look, I've enjoyed pot in my life, and I don't consider it a really hard drug. I don't think it's a gateway to other drugs or anything like that. But, you know, BJ always had a reputation of being heavily into pot. And, that could be part of how you get into some of the other drugs that are rumored to be involved in what he's doing now. You know what I mean? Add to that head trauma, where he went from being one of the best boxers in the early days to uh, starting to get hit by other guys, and as he got later in his career and he got lazier and stuff, he took you know uh Diaz. I don't think Diaz went 100% with him because they have the Ralph Gracie ties. And I think they respected each other. Whereas Diaz likes, if you look at it, this is one of the few fights where Diaz was unbelievably not disrespectful to his opponent, right? I mean, Diaz is a guy who was disrespectful to Anderson Silva, who's maybe an all-time great, but to BJ there was a level of respect there. But he took some headshots. He took headshots from Frankie Edgar. Um, Started to take head damage. So I think you do have to count the brain trauma of fighting, and who knows how BJ trained and how BJ's gym epic was. Was he one of those guys that liked to spar a lot, go 100%, get hit, work through punches and things like that? Those types of things start to carry. So now you've got drug use, head trauma, an ego that doesn't really, never really has taken direction. Maybe add to that now harder drugs, and I think I'll let you mention it, but it sounds like he may have been diagnosed with some type of more serious disease as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's get back to the drug use. Like his girlfriend, when she put a restraining order on him, not just his mom, his girlfriend, or the mother of his children, had to put a restraining order on him. Um, she said he'd been a cocaine addict since he was 14 years old.
Okay.
And another thing, I think the most oldest of his kids, his oldest daughter, said she'd rather jump off a balcony, top floor balcony, than spend time with him at this point. You know, so yeah, I mean, he's had a history of drug use, and that at this point doesn't look like it's changed. It's got even worse. You know, as people are saying, he's using meth and things like that. But
Typically,
also
unless you
that,
stop, it doesn't get better.
he was diagnosed with some degree of Parkinson's, from what I understand.
Okay.
It doesn't look as
And
obvious as.
on top of that, there's also been DUIs, which means you've got a cocktail of drugs in the mix there. If you include alcohol, and alcohol is definitely um, underestimating the damage it can do because it's legal, but it can be extremely damaging. And again, if his drug use and alcohol use goes back to when he was 14, he's 46 now. So you're talking about 3 decades of use where you know like I said, he's been arrested for DUIs. He's had uh, after being a UFC champion and being a worldwide known martial artist, street fights, which is like you know there have been a couple other unhinged characters in this sport, and that's the level he's at. You don't see uh, your average martial artist, once, especially at the end of their career, start getting involved in street fights again, unless there are problems. I guess the guy I'm thinking of is Mayhem Miller. Guys of that nature that also kind of fell apart when the structure of a career left them. And I did a little research. I wasn't looking into Miller, so I'm not sure if he's doing good or not right now. I hope he is, but he had some downtime and stuff like that. But that's the level of guy you're talking about. Was BJ Penn should never be in a street fight, after he'd retired from the UFC. This is insane behavior, and somebody should be questioning why that's happening. Matt Serra beating up a guy or controlling a guy in a buffet is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about street fights.
Well, he had
Um,
always done that. And one of the things when he trained with the taekwondo guy and the guy showed him some jujitsu, and he got tapped out and that, his first thought was, if I learn this stuff, I'll be able to beat up everybody in Hilo. I'll be the king of Hilo. That was his first thought. With this, I can win all my street fights. You
yeah,
know. So it was from him. It was as I said before, that was really the catalyst from training, was the fact that he was getting in a lot of fights and not really doing anything productive with his time, and his dad didn't want to have it, you know.
yeah,
And
and
his dad has since passed away, so yeah.
yeah, and the idea that his mother, like you said, his mother and his family seems to have had some money. We know this is true because when he left the UFC the first time, he went off and we were like, well, what's he going to do now? This, that, the other thing. And rather than go to Pride, which would have been what, anybody else is really the only other option for a guy that level, right? He went and started his own promotion and, set up fights um, that, somebody paid for, so
Hmm.
there was money there. It was not like, Rumble on the Rock ripped people off, They put on high level fights. They did near 10 shows, if not 10 shows. Um, and they paid for all that. And that was family money because I don't think, that they were going to make the money. They didn't have pay-per-view. I don't think they were going to make the money all back on ticket sales and things like that. So they ran at a loss. There was money there before BJ made his $2 to $5 million in his career. And if his mom is controlling that, it's not like she. So this threat that his mom is doing him wrong by money, and there are a couple other stories out there where like him and his brothers are all named JD, so that
Hmm.
they could all share the same insurance and things like that. Um, and
That was
maybe a
his
little bit,
dad's name.
yeah, maybe a little bit of
Kind of like
something.
George Foreman, you
Yeah, exactly.
know.
But if this falls into a category of like it could have been some insurance fraud or something going on there and stuff, but they've got money. They had money to do some shows, so BJ's not responsible for the family money, or not. He's not responsible for all the money that's in play. Like his money's being kept away from him. Bottom line is if his mother chose at this point, disinherited him, he's not doing any of the money that comes from the family fortune, you know? So, yeah, this theory that he's being ripped off or something like that is not the case. His family had some money before. And the other part of it is that somehow the government is involved, in BJ's delusion. And I mean, I think we can dispel that right away. Anybody who wants to give that any credence at all, I think we're going off the deep end there, and that's not accurate. I mean, if you believe that our government is capable of things, yeah, of course, and I agree with you too. And you know, you could talk about Epstein, you could talk about that, but the BJ family fortune is not enough to move the government's needle, where they would send agents and surgeries or masks for people and stuff like that. This is a complete delusion.
Yeah. And before we continue, BJ did have one brother, Reagan. So he's got three brothers, JD and then Reagan. And
Okay.
yeah, Reagan, who is the only one that lives near them, he lives two houses down from them, and he was the one who kind of got involved in this latest incident when BJ got into it with his mom. Um, I thank goodness he does live near them because I think that outcome would have been worse a long time ago. Because apparently he was the one who would intervene whenever things got a little too out of hand. Because his other brothers aren't there. He's got a brother, BJ Penn, who lives on Oahu. He's lived on Oahu for a long time. I trained with him quite a bit in 2013. And I even rode BJ a couple times in 2013. And his other brother, JD, who moved to Florida, um, which we'll talk a little bit about later.
And
But
that's a JD that managed his career.
yes, and he tried to get him some help. He came back, wanted to take BJ to Florida with him, and I guess I don't know what happened exactly, but when got in the airport, he bailed. You know, ran off or got a ride from somebody and bailed. Um, so there are people who've tried to help him. Um, Pat Tenor from Ruka, I know, was another one who came down trying to help him because they had sponsored him for a long time and things like that. So there's people who tried to help him, and it hasn't been successful.
Yeah, I drew the comparison offline, and I'll do it here. It's like there is that Conor McGregor type of, he doesn't listen to anybody. There's nobody who can get through to him when he wants to put the walls up and think he's right, and that's it. There's nobody who can get through to him. And he has that in common with Conor as well. It's a shockingly start.
All right, Miguel, so go ahead. I'm going to let you continue from where we left off.
Yeah, like I said, it's just the kind of thing here is that to sort of summarize what we've been talking about already, it's like you've got drug use, and like I knew he was a pothead. You shed light on the fact that he might have been a cocaine addict since he was in his teens, which would probably mean alcohol as well. So you're talking about at 46, more than 3 decades of use of that stuff. Add to that, some head trauma for sure. Um, you mentioned a Parkinson diagnosis, which he's a young man. Many people associate Parkinson's with old people, but at 46, it's kind of young to have that. But if he has some of the symptoms of that already, and Add to that the ego of a person who's never been in control, and you're talking about a situation where this guy really needs help. This guy really needs help in a big way, or he's going to wind up in jail. And it doesn't look like he's open to help. So I was comparing him to Conor McGregor as a guy that, he doesn't listen to anybody. He does what he thinks he's right. He does what he wants to do. And if he doesn't like what you've got to give him in terms of advice, he doesn't listen to you. Um, Add to that, he's an elite martial artist in training. I'm sure he could still beat me up, but he's still very dangerous. But that's the point. Is that at some point he's still very dangerous. And he has in one of the things that we haven't mentioned yet, but he has in some of his own links and um, videos that he's put up, uh, express violence or thoughts of violence towards his mother, towards his family, where he thinks that they've been uh, supplanted by other people. It's unclear what he's actually trying to say, because he said that they were killed and that they're agents with masks that are doing this, but then he asked the police in his area to help him find his family. Is he talking about finding the bodies, or is he talking about um, finding the real people? Like, it's unclear. Like, his story doesn't has that disconnected pattern of not really, of not really having sense, which is another sign of what we're talking about, a guy who's in serious need of help and is unlikely to accept any help. Um, it makes him very dangerous. Um, People talk about an example of, and this is one of those examples from pro wrestling, but and I think it was Jesse on Fire talked about the Chris Benoit situation, where Chris Benoit did actually kill his family, um, and killed himself. And that had to do also with steroid use and other things which are going on there. But when you start threatening family and threatening to kill your family, is it a situation where Bennett, he might, um, he might, actually at some point act out on some of the thoughts he's been having and actually do his mother harm, do his brothers harm. Um, that's a dangerous situation. And then if care is not enacted in a proper way, I'll give you another pro wrestling example that fewer people will connect. But um, I'm talking about a old time wrestler named Fritz von Erich, and Fritz was in an institution for because of dementia and Parkinson's and these types of mental problems. Now he was a lot older than BJ. Um, but if you just take him and put him in jail or take him and put him in an institution, you're actually maybe putting some of the workers and some of the other, you know, either inmates or patients in jeopardy with BJ if he really starts to act out on some of these thoughts. Fritz von Erich, he was an older man at this point, but he actually had a attack of dementia and killed one of the other people who was in the hospital with him, and while driving it, like a literal, like doing a real pro wrestling pile driver on a man who's in his 70s or something like that, who was not trained to fight or anything like that, did nothing to him, but he had some type of delusion and he killed the guy. So the solutions here for BJ are very, very few. You know, isolation, isolation won't cure him or won't help him.
Mm.
Um, some type of cycle. Is he open to help? I don't know if he's open to help. So the walls
I
are
don't know
starting to
how you
close in.
fix some of those things. I mean,
Right.
I guess getting rid of the drugs will help with some of the psychosis type things, but apparently, this Capgras syndrome, Parkinson's contributes to that. Brain trauma contributes to that. Those are things you can't erase from his life.
Right, and that's why the Benoit thing, when Jesse on Fire mentioned it, and um, I think Jesse sometimes has subjects that are not MMA and stuff like that, and I'm not a listener of his podcast. I listen to this show on this, and I just want to give him credit for mentioning Chris Benoit first because he was the one who mentioned it. But Benoit took his own life. But BJ may not be suicidal. That hasn't showed itself. But if he starts to do some damage and he feels like the police aren't helping him, I saw something where he mentioned that there are a few policemen on Oahu, obviously, that trained with BJ. That BJ would know personally, and he's expecting them to help him and
Or
do
Hilo,
him the
yeah.
or
People that
yeah.
train within Hilo, yeah.
So explain he's expecting them to help him, and it's like how can a policeman take some of what's going on here seriously, other than to think BJ is the one that needs help. You know what I mean? It's not that. What are they gonna do? Go out into the woods and look for bodies that are not there. Go out into uh, the suggestion that the government is masking people. Eh, you know again, if BJ's family had Elon Musk level money, then maybe that would interest government agencies, or the level of money that gets moved around at those levels. But BJ's wealthy by my standards, but it's a drop in the bucket. He's not going to be noticed by the type of players who could produce masks and create identities for people and stuff like that. So it's complete delusion.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's. I don't see positive ways out of this. Unfortunately, I think he's already headed down a road of this ends badly and this ends in tragedy, and nobody's going to be able to help him.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, this is something, it's got to be hard for his mom, because she, like I had said earlier, she was the one who financed his career. She was his biggest fan. And, so she was part of the reason he probably has some of that brain trauma, because he was the horse that they kept putting on the track. And I'm sure she feels bad about some of that. And it's got to be a difficult choice to make. Do I put my son out when it's likely going to end in tragedy if I do? Or do I keep him
Yeah,
in
at
the
this
house?
point,
Or do I keep him in the house and try to somehow live through this?
yeah,
It's
see,
difficult.
yeah, at this point, I don't think it can be taken to. First of all, she is the one who filed a restraining order against him, right?
Yes.
And has had him arrested. So she's done, I think, the only logical thing a person could do when they've been threatened in the way that she's been threatened.
She's been trying to get him out of that house for a long time, from what I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and like a mother, like you said, you put up with more than maybe other victims would or whatever. But at this point, she really would be dropping, her own uh, self protection, uh, she's in danger, and she should realize that, and she should protect herself at this point, to the point where, hey, maybe lock up the house and go live with JD in Florida for a little bit until BJ's situation plays itself out. We'll see what the courts do with what he's already done, what he might already be accused of.
Well, they
Um,
have to arrest him. He didn't show up to court. He's
yeah, now he's
basically a
not.
fugitive at this point.
Yeah, so now he's compounded it. He was arrested, let go, within 24 hours had to be arrested again because he broke the agreement that got him released the first time in the first place. And now he failed to appear in court on previous charge where he had a court date set up. So yeah, again, BJ, all of this is BJ's behavior, and I'm not saying it's on BJ because BJ is a victim of a lot of problems. The CT, it's funny, the 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 brain trauma is until somebody can actually open him up and look at his head. Maybe a CAT scans reveal stuff or something like that. But he's going to set himself up for a CAT scan. But it would be interesting to see what is going on there because brain trauma is a real thing. Um, and again, that's just one of the factors. Pouring alcohol and drugs on top of that, that's the formula that we're looking at here. So again, like I said, this identity theft and this is another, and I don't mean to talk bad about tragic situation, but I implied earlier in the podcast that BJ might be a physical prodigy, but I'm not sure he's not a mental midget. Like I don't think he was ever proved himself that smart, and I think his family knew it if they've controlled his finances throughout his whole career because if you give him access to his money, he would have blown it all or done some damage to some people and stuff, and um, maybe augmented his drug use to the point where they were worried enough to have powers of attorney to control his stuff. So yeah, and this use of the identity theft, you know, it's just, I once upon a time before I was in MMA, and a lot of times I was in my early part of my MMA career. I worked for a bank where um I was actually in fraud investigations, and we did what is identity theft fraud, and we saw some pretty sophisticated cases, but in none of those cases were government agents wearing masks. you know, so
Yeah.
he's using a term he's read or heard somewhere to describe and to put together a fear and loathing in Las Vegas type of story in his head.
Yeah, and that video of his arrest was really weird too. He's laying on a bed. You got multiple cops around him. Somebody said it looked like something from The Exorcist, and
Yeah, again, in that respect, and I've seen other like some of the other podcasts that are not, I don't even know the names of them because some of the people that are doing them are really, you know, kind of influencers, kind of YouTubers and stuff, but not really qualified to talk about the sport in any way, shape, or form. Um, but it is a situation there where those cops very much were in danger also, and at that point, if they had to pull their guns out and shoot a violent BJ Penn, I don't know if I would have been surprised if that is actually how that happens, or the next time you're in a situation like that, that is what happens if BJ goes off the deep end. The fact that he stayed in control may have been some self-preservation that he saw, in order to avoid, or maybe he actually knew one of the police officers, and so, or at least
no, I
generally
think what he did was he realized that he had some people around him that weren't going to put up with his nonsense.
yeah, but
Had it been his
if,
mom and his brothers, he probably would have continued to be a fool. But I think when he
yeah,
realized, okay, these people aren't going to put up with my crap,
if it
you
was
know,
just two kind of friends that weren't armed, and he decided to beat them up, he can probably muster up enough to do damage in a 2-on-1 situation with no rules. He's a dangerous guy. He was. I started with the story of him beating up my guy in his very first fight at the highest level of MMA because he was a physical prodigy. So you don't lose some of that. You know what I mean? So he's still extremely dangerous to your average guy.
yeah.
So something made him realize these are cops. They've got guns. I'm going to self-preserve.
And did you hear his friend like constantly asking for his money? Did you watch that?
Whoever the guy from Chicago is that there's another guy that's absolutely doing him no favors,
He's
and
a jiu-jitsu guy. Pete Leskos, I think is his name. Mr. Wristlock. And yeah, he was a good grappler back in the day, but it sounds like he's on the same drugs. Yeah. All he
Mr.
was thinking
Wrist.
once he realized BJ had money in his pocket, that was his sole interest.
How much money was it?
I don't know, but he was just like, leave it here. I don't have any money. My debit card's broken. It was no
Yeah, how's he
longer
gonna?
he was no longer concerned about BJ, he was concerned about the money.
He should have been he should be sent back to Chicago. He shouldn't have been. He's a guy that did BJ no favors in that situation. He's telling the cops, leave him alone. I'm from Chicago. We don't put up with this. He said something like that. It's like just completely irrelevant. Actually, he's lucky the cops didn't get agitated with him either.
Yeah.
Um, and just yeah, another guy that is going to be um feeding BJ's ego. What was he doing there? Were they rolling? Were they practicing? Were they doing drugs together? What's the
I
situation?
think he's been there off and on from over the years. Yeah, apparently he got a pretty bad neck injury surfing out there, really bad. Um, yeah, so he's been a part of his training off and on, and there's a lot of guys who go out there to do jujitsu with him, and I would guess Reagan would see Jim and Hilo. So they have a lot of guys that are well accomplished, well
There's still a
regarded.
jujitsu community. There's
Yeah.
still a jujitsu community around him and stuff like that. But yeah, we'll see how fast that crumbles without BJ there kind of as a figurehead. And
Well,
who
he's
knows
not.
how long.
Apparently, he's not involved in the program. He doesn't.
Okay.
He doesn't teach or anything.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's still far and away the most famous martial artist on the island, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that I think is enough to keep BJ hanging around, even if he's, you know, and maybe his jiu-jitsu. I don't know how good physically he is. Like I said, I'm sure he can beat me up. You know what I mean? But it's like, is he deteriorated to the point where he hasn't trained in many years or anything like that? But he's still a dangerous guy to two cops or to your average Joe in a jail cell, or if he winds up in a mental ward or a hospital, of some type, to another patient. He's still extremely dangerous to be that unhinged, and he's made threats of violence, which I think shouldn't be underestimated. It's one of those things where it's like he's threatening violence. You should listen to him. This isn't a good situation where you're going to wait for him to actually act on the violence, hurt a family member or hurt somebody else, and then be like, okay, now we got to take care of it. It's like this is something that there's plenty of signs there that something should be enacted to nip it in the bud and make sure nobody gets hurt.
Yeah.
That's what's scary about society today, is that there's this like way of trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. And this is a bad situation. You're talking about an elderly woman at this point who could be in physical danger, and you're gonna run a risk of waiting for it to happen before any action gets taken. That's what's one of the things that's messed up in society today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's good. It would be difficult to give him treatment, but hopefully this latest TRO, if they ever go ahead and arrest him, uh, when they find him, Big Island, they call it Big Island. It's a lot of space out there, so not necessarily easy to find someone if they're decent at hiding. Um, but yeah, hopefully this time, if he gets caught, they can get him some treatment. I don't know how much power the government would have to do that, but
No, I think at this point, this may be a situation where he's got to, that treating him might be just isolating him
Yeah,
and
let's
just,
get him dried out off the drugs, and then let's see what we can
yeah,
do from there. How
yeah,
bad he is. Yeah,
isolate him, yeah, dry out on the drugs and see if the damage is still there. And then at that point, really start to worry about the potential victims in this case, because again, you don't want to. It's not. He's threatened to do damage to his family. This isn't a situation where it's like, oh, he was joking, he was not serious. There's no real justification for making those threats. And to put him in a situation where he could act out on it, you really, I would need to see some extensive. He needs to go away until maybe not until maybe he needs to go away.
yeah. I don't think going to jail would help him because he can get drugs in there still, and it's just a bunch of knuckleheads there too. I think if he can get some treatment and they can have you know to a real facility where they can dry him out,
Right, right.
and because that's what needs to happen. You get him off
I,
the
I
drugs and then go from there.
and I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know how you plead guilty by or you're deemed unfit in some, but as a non-lawyer, as a non-doctor, he's about as unfit a character to be out in society and stuff, considering what he said, what his actions are, and what his potential is in terms of how much danger he could actually cause people. Um, he's about as unfit to be out as anybody. So yeah, I would agree with you. Just putting him in jail doesn't address any of those problems. I think he needs to be away somewhere else. So
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, Miguel, it's always interesting talking to you about this. Hearing your insights, it's going to be a interesting story to monitor. The first thing we'd have to see is if he gets caught, because that's
yeah,
the point. Unless he turns
and
himself in.
how he gets caught too, because you know if he's high or drunk and he's approached by police officers and makes the types of threats he's made to his family to a police officer, that's where you wind up shot
Hmm.
also, and you would, police officers aren't exactly the most popular characters in the world today. But you'd have to be in a situation there where, again, I can't express enough the elite level of this guy's abilities. Where when even now as a fallen type of angel, he's still so dangerous to your average person. He's so dangerous to a guy who's a part-time trained guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like even a cop, the cop is bigger, stronger, lifts weights. He's been active and stuff like that. It's not a guy who can defend himself against BJ Penn without, you know, and if the cop is aware of it or feels threatened, let's hope that he reacts like he reacted in the first arrest video where he's um tranquil and not in a situation where he's ready to act out and violent, because this could end really badly
Hmm.
and quickly.
Yeah. We'll just have to see what plays out. All right, Miguel. Well,
Man, it's I was looking at a list of this, unfortunately, this, like I said, the sport's full of guys that just
yeah.
went down, War Machine, um,
Baroni.
you know, yeah, um, Mayhem Miller's had some issues where he spent time in jail, and some domestic battery issues, related to people he knows and stuff. Um,
Stephen Bonner.
yeah, then you've got some just out and out nuts, loose cannons, Junie Browning, you know, um, and then other people, Hermes Franca, uh, that just so that when they were in the spotlight at the level of some of these guys, and BJ was one of the guys that was in the marquee spotlight for a long time, the effects on the ego also are one of the factors that, I don't think any of the other podcasts are going to mention. Um, but that really needs to be weighed in there, right with the drug use, right with the CT, not being able to handle the fall from grace and not being in the spotlight anymore. Um, and the effects that has on an ego, and how recapturing that buzz of being in the spotlight sometimes becomes extremely important to people as well. So he's got so many factors working against him. At this point, I guess you can close on. I hope he doesn't wind up shot, because the cops are going to be looking for him.
Oh, if he doesn't get some help, it's going to be over for him. He's going to hurt somebody, or he's going to get hurt, one or the other, or hurt himself. I don't see any good way at ending unless, like I said, he can get into a non-law enforcement facility, like a treatment, and they can start to work on him. Because otherwise, no.
Yeah, this is a worst case scenario.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everyone watching this, we always appreciate you guys watching all of our episodes, and try to get Miguel on here when I can. He's more busy these days, but
I just work in a schedule where it's like,
yeah.
Either I take a break from work, which sometimes is difficult, or I lose sleep because I got to sleep during the day, because I'm working a night job. So it's it's rough. But this one was enough to call me and get me out here. Maybe we could isolate some time this weekend and talk about Jones and Aspinall and some of the other stuff that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing altogether.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
It
all right,
doesn't
brother.
interest me really, because Jones is not going to fight. I've always felt that, just like Connor. I've always felt that way, so it doesn't really interest me.
Yeah. I mean, did they finish Aspinall Pereira? Is that set in stone?
I don't know what is set. I think I saw that he might fight Cyril Gahn. I don't know if that's factual or not, but I think it was. So we'll have to see.
Cyril Gahn.
Yeah.
Good Lord. I mean, maybe Dana could get him to fight one of his power slap guys.
Let me look it up. I'll look it up right quick, just for accuracy's sake. If we're versus, I'm trying to see if there's any news. Maybe it wasn't factual. No, maybe it wasn't accurate.
Okay, yeah. Well,
maybe it was a meme or something. Yeah.
It's a shame. It's a shame. It's a shame. So anyway, yeah, that means that the UFC, with Jones retired, that the UFC really has no marquee names, no big fights coming up.
This is some other stuff we can get into. I think that we can do some good stuff on. So,
all right, let's try to hook up during the weekend.
All right. So everybody watching the episode, we appreciate it. And until next time, see you later.
Hey, I'm Jacob Cooperman, and you were watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering combat sports since the 1990s, and Miguel has match-made over 200 different events amongst various promotions worldwide. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for future episodes. As for me, you can check me out at Gloves Up on YouTube and Coop TV with 3 O's on Instagram. Thank you guys, and enjoy the episode.